Men, I usually don't do an intro, but this week I am. It's been a brutal week down here. It's been far too cold to work constructively out in the shop. I didn't get a lot done. I did get a couple things done, but not nearly as much as I normally do or would have liked to. We've had rain, sleet, snow, freezing rain. It has sucked out there. The roads have been pretty much impassable due to the fact that the state of Texas does not own a snowplow or a salt truck. This would have been a minor inconvenience back up in Illinois where I used to live, but down here it was a big deal. But anyway, things are getting up and running again. It's warmed up a little bit. I'll be back out in the shop. So this week you get to see one more edition of the check valve testing thing. The black Viton ball is tested. You'll have to wait to the end to see the results of that. And I got started on another motor. So you'll see the beginning efforts on that. So let's get to it.
Men, and as usual, I use the term loosely. Because I just can't let something go. I'm going to dive back into the oil pump. I know the last video was going to be the last video. I'll call the last video the last official video on it, but I'm still going to keep trying here. I want a perfect result ultimately. Before you, one McMaster car, Viton rubber ball. No ball jokes necessary. The little black ball speaks for itself. These little bastards ain't cheap. They're $3.86 a piece. Damn. But anyway, we're going to shove it in the oil pump, fill it up with oil, and check back in a week and see what we got. I overshot my fill-to line again. Anyway, Viton rubber ball installed, oil up to here, and we'll come back and we'll look at it in a week or so. We'll see how the Viton rubber ball does. Next project motor right here. I think I've got the story on this one straight, but I might not. But anyway, this has got kind of a weird problem, or may have a weird problem, and I'll see if I could explain to you without messing it up how it got to where it is. This engine was in a chopper. The guy mocked it up, assembled it, bare metal, had the engine in it, had it running, had it driving, everything was fine. He broke it down to get painted, had the motor out, was getting the frame painted, and I'm not sure whether it was the same painter or a different painter, but he brought the motor to another painter who was doing some highlighting. Like this green tinting on this cover, and I know he didn't have to have the motor out to do that, but anyway, we think that the paint shop who was doing this highlighting work had the cam cover off to polish it. They say they didn't, but we think they did. Anyway, a guy picked it up from the painting guy, put it back in the engine, put the engine back in the bike, and the bike would not run. Absolutely would not run. The guy who was building this had a mechanic working with him, and they checked the compression was 0. What the hell? How could that be? So he brought the motor to a fairly reputable shop in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They looked it over, and they decided that the keyway for the pinion shaft was sheared, and that when the motor was rotating it wasn't turning the cam gears and such, so that's why there was no compression. I call bullshit on that. Every once in a while I get a motor where the keyway on the sprocket shaft side, the opposite side of the motor, shears, and that kind of makes sense because you're transmitting all the output power of the engine through the shaft and the keyway to the primary. This side really has less load on it, almost no load. All the pinion shaft does is turn the cam gears. So there's really no load to speak of on the pinion shaft and no reason for the keyway to shear. But anyway, the fairly reputable shop in Dallas decided that was wrong with it and told the guy that it was going to cost him $10,000 to fix this thing. And that's the point where the guy says, you know what, we're going to go a different route. So hence I end up with it over here. So I'm going to pull it apart, and I really don't think I need to, but I'm going to. You know, it's out of the bike. They had previously taken all this apart that you see apart. We want to get the black paint off of it. This black paint is ugly. I don't know why people paint crankcases black. It's just ugly. Is all there is to it. But we'll give it a little going over just to make sure everything is cool. But what we think happened was that when the painter guy had the cam cover off to polish it up or whatever he was doing to it, we think he got the cam timing fucked up. So that probably, we think, is the only thing that was wrong with it. But we're going to check the pinion shaft and make sure its keyway is not sheared. I'm going to have, obviously, the flywheels out of it. We'll check the run out on the crank. Pistons are not perfect, but they're pretty good. Maybe a little glaze breaking hone on the jugs and new rings, and we'll call that good. The rod bearings feel very good. I had the rods up, and there's really not a lot of play in them at all. So that feels pretty good. But anyway, we're going to tear it down and see what's inside. Let's continue on with this engine rebuild. I took it the rest of the way apart off camera. This is the pinion shaft. Obviously the shop in Dallas that claimed the pinion shaft key was sheared and that the pinion had rotated in the flywheel was wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. That looks fine. I put the whole assembled flywheel assembly on my truing stand, and it was out around by about 3.5 thousandths. So I took it the rest of the way apart to get to all the internals and see what was going on. Let's see what else we have. Okay, these are the rods out of it, and you'll notice it's got a Harley part number, and you'll also notice this RPLS. RPLS. I think that stands for replaces the Harley number. Anytime you see this, these are import rods. Allegedly, well, I've seen them on eBay as cheap as like 20 bucks, $15, $20. And allegedly, those rods are Chinese. There are other import rods that look just like this that are about 80 or 90 bucks. And allegedly, those are Japanese. And allegedly, the Japanese ones are better than the Chinese ones. This is what was in the motor. I'll put it back in if the owner wants me to. If he wants me to replace them with something else, I can, but this is what was in there. So somebody has been in this motor before, and I really don't see anything grossly wrong. So they seem like they did a fairly decent job. When this rod set was assembled onto flywheels, they really felt pretty good, and I wasn't sure I was going to take them apart, but I decided to take them apart in the end. And you might be able to make out these striations, and I am going to lap them. I suspect it's going to take just a very light lapping, and you could just barely feel these little striations in the rod. And both rod sets have similar such wear. And, you know, it's not very, this one you could really feel that it's a little more pronounced.
But anyway, I think a little lapping will clean this up very nicely. Two jobs at hand. We're going to go measure the runout on the pinion shaft, and we're going to measure the runout on the sprocket shaft. I don't believe I'm going to have to take the sprocket shaft out. I'll just leave it bolted in the flywheel, stick it between centers on the lathe, and see what the runout is on it. So we're going to go do those two things. And it's colder than hell out here. Everything is covered with snow and ice. But anyway, we're going to go do it, and I'll show you that. All right, here's the pinion shaft set up between two centers on the lathe. Got my dial indicator set up. So let's just rotate this and see what happens. You should try to get it focused here. Okay, you should be able to see the needle. You should be able to see the needle on the dial indicator. That's about a minus a half a thou. Okay, this thing is less than 1/1000th of an inch. I'd like it to be a little less than that, but even with the half a thou this is showing, I'm pretty sure I could get these wheels trued up to be less than a thou. I think we're going to be okay on that. So let's get the sprocket shaft in here and see what it does. Alright, so here's the sprocket shaft. Still bolted to the flywheel, set up between the same two centers that the pinion shaft was. You should still be able to see the 0 on the indicator. So let's spin this around and see what happens. It's just less than 1/1000th. So hopefully the little bit of offset on the pinion will be opposite of the little bit of offset on the sprocket shaft, so that when I bolt it together they'll cancel each other out and I could get this thing pretty close to 0. Anyway, this is good. I'm going to try to use it. So let's go back inside. Alright, I got the lapping tool chucked up in my 3-jaw. I got a digital readout on the lathe. I think the Harley book says to set the RPM at 160, so at the digital readout I could get it right on. The lap has been set so that it just allows the rod to slip over. So we'll put some compound on there and we'll start lapping. I expect this is not going to take very long. I expect just a few passes probably will do it. But let's fire it up and see what happens. I like to, I used to try to put the rod on while the lamp was turning. I decided that it's dangerous and I don't do it anymore. So I just try to put the rod on while it's stationary. And I'll do one rod and I try to count how many strokes I give it. I like to give it about 20. Take it off and then I'll go the other way.
Let's see what it looks like. Man, that's beautiful. All right, so that'll do it. 20 passes, with it in one direction. Well, 20 passes, this way, then I'll flip the rod over, go 20 passes that way. And this has got that nice frosty gray appearance that a lap bearing race should have. So without moving or changing the size of the lap, I'll do the other rod. That way I could kind of keep them both at the same size. And we'll flip it over and get the go in the other direction. Well, the same direction, but with the rod in a different direction, just to keep it even. That should do it. Yeah, this one I could still feel roughness in. Yeah, this race has still got some roughness, so you got to tighten the lap up. So you loosen this end first, and then you tighten this end. And I don't tighten it much. Charge it up a little bit more.
Lather, rinse, repeat. You know the drill. We'll finish up the female rod, then switch back over to the male rod, and that should take care of this.
The thrust washer is in good shape, but it seemed a little loose in there. I mean, I could push on it with my fingers and squeeze a little oil out from underneath there. So when I put these things in there, what I like to do is clamp them tight against the flywheel with, some arrangement of a C-clamp and a socket or whatever. And I use a punch that's got kind of a broad, flat point on it that's just a little bit rounded. And I'll dimple it. And the factory marks, there's usually 4 factory crimps on it. And I'll put 2
punch mark crimps, one on either side of each of the 4 factory marks. And this one, the guy who did it before, only used one. Not that that, made any significant difference, but I used 2, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's see if it made any difference. I don't see it moving. I don't see any oil oozing out. So I'm going to call that good. All right, one other thing I'm going to show you while I got this flywheel in my hand. Right here, this is the pinion side. And I've said this before, you could see where the pinion shaft bearing race has been rubbing on this lock plate. So I almost always trim them in through here, so I got a little clearance there, so they're not rubbing. The taper on the pinion shaft is clean and dry, as is the taper on the flywheel. The book says 150 foot-pounds. I always use the torque wrench on, flywheel, pinion shaft, sprocket shaft, bolts. Those are very important. And what I typically do is go to 140 and then look for a flat to line up with the lock plate. Let's see how the lock plate lines up. All right, if I go a little more, about another 1/16 of a turn maybe, should be right there. A little bit more. Tiny bit more. All right, that's good. This lock plate is all dented up and kind of gnarly. I think I got more in stock. I'm going to go get him a new one. Okay, crank pin nut. I have not removed the crank pin from the flywheel, and I'm not going to. However, I am going to make sure this nut holds torque. Upon occasion, I've seen these nuts crack and split when you get to 150 foot-pounds, and who knows what torque it was put down to before. So we're going to set it at, I got the wrench set at 140, so we're going to pull on it and see what happens. Ah, that's tight. And going to trim this lock plate so that it'll fit without rubbing on the pinion bearing race. Okay, lock plate trimmed up to clear the pinion bearing race, and that's all there is to that. All right, same gyrations on the sprocket side flywheel. We're going to clamp the thrust washer down, put a couple more pins in there, make sure it's tight. I didn't see any movement on this one, but I'm going to do this anyway just in case. We're going to check the torque on the sprocket shaft. I haven't removed it, but we're going to check it anyway. That one had some movement on it. We're going to pull it around a little more to line up the holes in the lock plate. Yeah, I think we're good right there. One other check. You've heard me say it before, I think. This flange is not supposed to seat on the flywheel. This flange is to provide a stop for the sprocket shaft bearing. So we need to make sure there's a clearance under the flange, between the flange and the flywheel. Otherwise, I'd have to take it off and bore that out a little bit to get the clearance. 0015 feeler gauge goes underneath there. And I do check this after it's torqued in case the final torque seats it a little farther. You want to check this, well, you want to check it before it's torqued and after it's torqued. If it's no good before it's torqued, it won't be any good after it's torqued. However, if it's good before it's torqued, it might be too tight after it's torqued. So this is good. We're going to clean this up and get ready to assemble it. Ooh, wait, almost forgot. The burr on the crank pin hole. And actually on this one it's pretty significant. Much better. Alright, I got a package of 2 10,000ths oversized rollers. We'll start with those. We'll see what happens. I do the wide ones first because they're easier to handle. And let's see if the rod fits over the crank pin. Okay, the rod does fit over the crank pin. Might be a tad loose, so we're going to put these away and try some 4 10,000ths over. So I'm going to spare you the tedious process wherein I get a set of 4 10,000ths over rollers, fit the wide ones into the cage, test fit the rod, find out those are just a little too loose. Then I get a set of 6 10,000ths over rollers, fit the wide ones into the cage, test fit it, and find out that it's still maybe just a little bit too loose. And finally, I end up with a set of 8 10,000ths over rollers that fit perfectly, and I call it good. Okay, here's the 8 10,000ths rollers fitted over this crank pin on the rods that I just lapped the races on earlier today. And if you look over here and I wiggle this, I don't know if you could pick up, there's just barely any movement. This is nearly perfect. This is probably about as perfect as I could get it. And of course the male rod, because it's narrower, has got just a little bit more. So this is good to go. Now here's the problem. You might be able to hear this, you might not, but listen carefully. You hear that rubbing? What that rubbing is this surface on the opposite side of the female rod is hitting the end of the pinion shaft. The pinion shaft protrudes through the nut about a thread. So I'm going to lift the rod assembly off of here and grind that last thread's worth off of the end of the shaft. So here's the end of the pinion shaft. The last thread and a half, whatever it was, ground down flush with the nut. So the connecting rod will no longer be hitting the end of the shaft. Always a good thing. Okay, and obviously the flywheel was back over in the parts washer. All the grinding dust was, washed off, blown off, dried off. So this is good to go. We'll put the rods back on there again. Perfect. All right, next step is bolt the other half of the flywheel on there and start truing it up. All right, truing by my usual method. I just get a straight edge and line up the edges. Both sides, check them against each other. Frequently, one wheel is a little smaller than the other, so there'll be a couple of thousandths gap maybe on either side. I try to center it up. I got my clamping device. Clamp them lined up, and put about 100 foot-pounds of torque on the crank pin nut, and then we'll throw it in the truing stand and see where we're at. This clean living is killing me. Ever since I gave up the hookers and booze, life has been treating me well. So this is just throwing together the first time around. I'm right at 1/1000th of an inch on that side. So that's good to go the way it is. Let's move it over to the other side. And I'm right at 1/1000th of an inch on the pinion side. So we'll put some final torque on this, maybe tweak it a little tiny bit, and it should be good to go. It really doesn't get any better than this. Alright, it was pretty much good to go. And that last little segment of video I did, I wanted to get it as good as I could get it. So watch the needle now. And I got 5/1000ths preload on it. So that's, plenty of tension to make sure the little rod follows the shaft. Yeah, doesn't move. I wouldn't have believed it myself. Now the other side does move a little bit. Let's move it over. Alright, I got about 3 thou preload on this side. Let's see what this side does. Plus a half, minus a half. So this side is just a little less than 1/1000th and the other side is 0. Doesn't get any better than that. Gonna put the lock plate on and call this done. Well, so far we got the flywheels and rods ready to go. That's a big accomplishment for one day. I've got to get a list of parts and stuff together for this engine. And one of the things I need to do is measure the pistons because I'd like to use these over again. The cylinder's already at 60 over. So these things are getting close to the end of their lives. The pistons are not really too bad. There were some slight vertical scratches in them. A little 1000 grit sandpaper kind of polished everything up over here. You could still see a little bit of scratch, but I'm not worried about that. I think those will be fine. What I'm concerned about is whether size-wise they're still in the ballpark. So let's measure them and see what we get. Okay, so I've got in my hand a rear one, and that one is 3.245. Yep, 3.245. So let's see what the front one measures out to. And that's nice, it's the same. Now we need to know how big the jugs are. And we're going to do that this way. We're going to zero out the dial bore gauge at 3.245 and then see how many thousandths of an inch bigger than that the cylinders are. And they'll either be within an acceptable limit or not. I don't know if I could get it so you could see both ends of this operation. Okay, this is 0. And I don't know if you could see that or not, but I'm letting the little nipple here on the measuring part of this thing get bigger. So you can see as it gets bigger, the needle moves towards the left, I guess. So let's stick it in a cylinder and see what the cylinder does with it. This is a rear. Ooh. See, this is 5/1000ths of an inch. Oh, that's going to be a little sloppy. Yeah, that's 5/1000ths. So the cylinder is, let's see, that is, so rears 3.250. So the clearance is 0005, 005, which is a little high. The book on a newly bored cylinder is 0.3 to 0.4, I do believe, on a 1000cc motor. Let's see what the front one is. That is the front one. Ooh, and that one's a little over 5, like 5.5. Yeah, okay. So a little sloppy to reuse those pistons. Those are 60 over. I'd have to go 70 over. I don't know if I could get 70 over or not. I gotta look around. Anyway, that's what I needed to accomplish for today. Now, this has been festering for about a week. The rubber Viton ball is not the magic solution. It still bypasses, so no easy fix there.
So that wraps up this week's video. I got more motor rebuilding that I'll be getting into next week. So the next video will cover a lot of that. And I'm still not giving up on the damn oil pump check valve. I got an engine to rebuild, and just to provide a base comparison, I'm going to clean up the oil pump on this motor. Just clean it up, not going to do anything to it, not going to lap anything, not going to cut anything. Just clean the oil pump up and see what it does when subjected to my leak-through test. Anyway, that's all I got for now, and I am out of here. Stay warm.